One of the questions that I'm seeking to answer as I travel around the United States and just talk to individuals and organizations, I have always heard that sustainability, ethics, and capitalism can't coexist.
Yeah.
Can they?
Sustainability, ethics, and capitalism.
All right.
This is a pleasure.
Appreciate it. So first of all, welcome to the viewers. This is our inaugural interview with Ripple on the Road.
I love that.
I am Mike Shadroff. I'm the founder and CEO of the Ripple Center,
Wonderful.
which is a 501c3 nonprofit focused on impact entrepreneurship. How are we going to create more impact entrepreneurs and inspire others to do the same? I happen to be here in Manhattan in the office of Madhive with Spencer Potts, who is the president of Madhive.
Correct.
You are also the managing partner of Maximalist Ventures.
That's right.
You are the majority investor of Prospect Farms.
Correct.
And you are the capital chair of river.fund.
I am.
So with, fortunately, all your free time, you were able to schedule this interview with me.
It's a pleasure, yeah.
So let me ask you, just to get started, Spencer, where does all this drive and motivation come to do all this? And what are your tips and tricks to be able to manage it internally?
It's a good question. So the first question you asked is really around motivation and drive. It's interesting to me as I reflect on it because it has, at 51, I've started to really, embrace all of the learning that I kind of want to ascribe to kind of like take in. And I say that because was I always motivated to kind of build and learn and develop, and in this case, kind of organize businesses? I guess so. I just didn't necessarily know what to do with my energy when I was younger. Had a very loving household, very fortunate to be in that position, and went to University of Hampshire, for all you Wildcats out there.
Right.
And ended up, coming to New York at like 25. And just, again, I was a history major, just looking for some direction. I had something happen through my 20s into my early 30s that really changed me and shaped me. And it's something that you hear about often, I think, with people that get involved in some kind of conflict or affliction. I had Lyme disease, right? So I came down with Lyme disease when I was about 30 years old. I was always an excitable and continue to be an excitable person, so it takes very little to get me to kind of be excited, and I feel very fortunate to have that like disposition. I had Lyme disease, again, starting around 30 years old, progressed, for the better part of 8, 9, 10 years. I was fortunate to get treated. It didn't necessarily show up on any of these tests.
Okay.
That path, if you will, that I took, again, through my physical journey really had me sit back and really be more aware of what I really wanted to do over a period of time because I was listening more. I was just kind of just in a little bit of a daze, but also just very grateful for and had a lot of perspective on, I think, people that were doing other elements of work that I found very inspiring. And I feel like I was almost like forced to be a little bit more still, forced to be a little bit more focused. And it's amazing, like the silver lining of an affliction like that, where yes, I would never wish it on anyone to have that much, chronic pain. But it really kind of shaped and kind of had me focused. So when I came out of Lyme disease, I just really felt, that much more gratitude for like everything that I was able to accomplish through my disease. I was fortunate to be in an industry that had a lot of tailwinds, was the hedge fund industry and more in finance. And so that was me just out getting people excited about what I'm excited about when I really was unable to kind of focus any of my energy except just kind of stay somewhat present with my current workload. And so getting out of Lyme disease, I just was like the most excitable version of myself. And I also was someone who wanted to decide how to give back and kind of combine those because I just felt really blessed for what had happened where I actually felt some kind of cure underway. So I think, it gets into more of an existential thing for me where it's like, once I surrendered to the disease, I had the good fortune of having it just kind of start to evaporate with the right treatment. And but once I surrendered, which is kind of part of my motto as well, I was able to kind of really focus on how I wanted to serve humanity and how I wanted to be seen by others. And, again, it was a hard knocks way to maybe learn that lesson.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I feel forever blessed for it.
And it seems to be a theme that I keep hearing, especially from individuals who are doing high-level work, gratitude, mindfulness, even meditation.
Yeah.
Like you definitely recommend that over tick bites.
I do. Yeah, anything that can get you to really determine kind of what energy you want to be putting out into the world. And I just think, again, it was never in my frontal cortex. Again, I was just running with just a natural level of energy. And fortunately, I was involved in enough, again, in energy levels, I think, and sociability, and came from a very affectionate household. So all of that played into just developing some level of like self-esteem on what I could accomplish. But the job was less important to me at that point. I was running around selling hedge funds or private equity funds or venture capital funds, raising money. And as I said earlier, getting people excited what I'm excited about, right? Didn't take much for me to get excited. Someone's like, I got a great performing fund. I'm like, great, I'll go on the road. I get to meet people, hang out. I do love the social element. I'm a very social person. And then I was like, wait, really, what is your purpose, right? And I'm sure it's something you encounter often. Like, what is your purpose, right? And so I think as I reflected on that in a very quiet time when I was forced to be somewhat still because I didn't have the energy, right? So once I lost that, never know what happens when you lose your health. You hear it all the time, like, well, at least you have your health. And so when I lost my health, that all came crystal clear to me that I wanted to really devote more time to being very deliberate with my energy. Not only very present, but very deliberate.
So how do you go from history major into venture capitalism and hedge funds?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I talk often to a lot of people that graduate from the university and even just my godchildren, and fortunate to have some nieces and nephews that I'm very close to as well. And I just say, listen, the element of me changing in finance, which again, this is 4 years ago where I went from 25-year career in raising capital for different people in different organizations to just deciding to be an entrepreneur on my own. Good fortune of meeting someone through a friend. And all of this I ascribe to, or I think it's really just a function of showing up, literally just every day showing up, asking questions. Every time you think you want to make a statement, often default to another question. Be consistent, listen, and I think what happens is like these shapes of kind of like, ambition start to kind of, at least in my instance, kind of overtake you on like, wow, like I feel like I have enough informed information to kind of really be excited about something that I can actually have even more of an impact on. And, maybe there's a little bit of me that was always like kind of wrestling with authority, and I always felt like I could, maybe in a almost naive way kind of compete. And so all of that culminated in me saying, hey, let me try to do something different, right? But it comes from those same elements, and I'm glad you asked them, of show up, ask questions, empathize, ask questions, more questions, try to have a positive influence. And this comes from, again, my upbringing, a lot of people around me, because I do believe it takes a village. Try to leave every conversation with having had a positive influence, right? I have these little sayings that I kind of always walk around with, like outside of one word themes, like be consistent. More people are going to want to be around you, right? You're going to want that, right? And then, at the end of the day, like have a lot of candor for closure. I always that's one of my expressions. We're very candid with an upfront organization so that you can kind of get your mental state to have closed the loop in my mind and then move on to another conversation. So these are the things that I've just accumulated over the years that I feel make me happy, and that's where I find the most joy. And I think it's a universal joy, and even like Buddhism and other religions have kind of come off the back end of, hey, at the end of the day, and there's, I don't know if you've read David Foster Wallace, This is Water, that just fun little commencement speech that he gave to Kenyon College in 2010. I feel like that's one of my secular, Bibles, for lack of a better word, where it's like, you get to choose how to think, right? And that hit me over the head like a 2x4. And again, it took some time for me to be saddled and riddled with an infectious disease to kind of like really have that kind of quiet time. Otherwise, who knows? I might have been sitting in this just world of like, what's in it for me? Because I think that's a natural default setting we're all born with as human beings. Now it's kind of like, how can I serve others?
So it's interesting because when you think of, when somebody throws out the idea of hedge funds or, again, venture capitalism, often people just think profit, right? Maximizing profit.
They do.
And often, right, when you first start off, even if you're a mission-oriented or a value-oriented person, you're at the mercy of the systems that are in place.
Yeah.
How do you, or how did you reconcile with maybe what you were doing to what you really wanted to be doing, or focusing on, you use the word impact.
Yeah.
How do you
No, I
reconcile
appreciate that
all
question, Michael. I do know that reconciling even finance was, capital markets make the world go round. Money is a lubrication, almost everything, including the impact you want to make. And I always thought about and this is, I talk often within the companies that we run, like, what is my utility, right? And so if my utility, and this I reconciled even raising capital in finance, is my utility is to, and I have to believe that the people involved and that the mission is to grow a pool of capital over time. Many of our clients, if you will, universities, pensions, endowments, everybody, again, non-for-profits across the board. So I felt really good in going in front of Ripple on the road and saying, hey, listen, you have a pool of capital, as you were, of course, going to be wonderfully successful with this venture. We say, hey, listen, you have to, let's compound on the capital that you've raised in the donations, so that there's a point in time where you're going to need that. Let's do that. And you do it in a tax-free manner, of course, because of the nature of your work. It's really just empowering that I can say, okay, this is what we are. What we're doing is, if we believe, and look at the track record, there are things I would underwrite, right, to make sure that I felt like we could have that impact, or at least it was a good risk profile. That's kind of how I reconcile. Like, everybody that we came in touch with, was looking certainly for us to profit. Many of our constituents, again, were non-for-profit. So I liked working, and I was doing a lot of board meetings with a lot of non-for-profits, charities, non-for-profit, charities, endowments, foundations, et cetera.
Okay. Speaking of which, could you tell us a little bit about river.fund?
Yep, river.fund is a fun story for us to tell. Those of us who kind of came to a good fortune of meeting Swami Durga Das, who took his ashram name. He was born Michael, I believe was his first name, Italian young man out of Brooklyn, who had kind of, he will tell you, lost his way a bit and found a woman by the name of Maja, who was running a ashram down in, I think, Florida, after he was like Europe for several years. And the whole idea was to just dedicate yourself to humanity. And so he came back fully inspired about how he wanted to live his life. And he started working with AIDS patients during the AIDS epidemic. And
this was back in 1991?
This is back in the late 80s, early 90s,
okay.
Right? And he lost 2 partners along the way as part of the gay community, and he just was steadfast. And as he says very often, once you kind of look death in the face and you kind of get that kind of exchange about the power of life, he wanted to take that recognition and that, I guess, connection and that connectivity to anything he applied himself to. And after he cycled through and helped as much as he could and became a social worker, he saw just the natural food epidemic around. And so he literally on his own convinced, I think, about a dozen of his friends to come to his house every Saturday and, as he will say, hawk and schlep food from a whole bunch of places, the food bank, City Harvest, some of the programs here in New York, in conjunction with like JFK Airport. You start learning about where food comes from. It's like, oh, United Airlines had an extra flight. They didn't need the food, so it's going to sit on a pallet. Swami, come get it, right? Things like that. So we set up a food pantry. So it started off as a food pantry, and when I was coming out of my Lyme's disease affliction, I was sitting down with a friend of mine at New Year's, and I said, I really want to kind of like start giving back. I want there to be some grassroots. I want to really dig in. That's something I can have a real tangible impact on. My buddy Mike Tiedemann, who's chairman of the board and partner of mine, said, I think I have something for you. And we sat after going to the food pantry, which again had 12 unpaid volunteers working as a food pantry. And over the years, we sat with Swami and said, you need a board, we should put some more money into this. We're just absolutely enamored with your relentless nature and the selflessness of what you're giving, right? He was barely kind of able to live on his own, but he was just pouring all of his money and his heart and his soul into his community. So the river.fund is to feed and empower those to move beyond the lines of poverty. So we believe it to be a kind of a multi-generational cycle, right? Let's stabilize the current generation with effectively food, which is the first line of defense. Okay. We act as a government hub now for a whole bunch of like government services, right? And we also have some children's programs because we believe, again, back to it takes a village, it takes a community. So the river.fund very much is food, benefit and service, and a bunch of what we call cradle to college. Okay. We do anything from baby showers to the women in our community. We serve over 15,000 families full of food every week. We also have gap scholarship funding over in the progression of a child's school curriculum.
And I believe as a big Mets fan,
Yeah.
right? The Mets are sometimes
The
involved
Mets
with
are
that.
very involved in the River Fund when they can
Okay.
be, and also Bloomberg and a lot of corporate sponsors have come over
Sure.
the years. And so we built it from, again, I think it had a budget of maybe 80 grand to now an annual $4 to $5 million budget, which we
great.
want to continue to grow. Yeah, and it's very uplifting, and it's very real, and it's very tangible, and it's, I think, very intellectually honest. You can really kind of build and try to make sure that you can sustain the current generation. Many of them are, immigrants that have like very little, security around them, to just helping maybe the child gets a chance, and we can keep him in school to kind of lift his family out of poverty. So it's a very special development and community for us.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And when you talk about poverty, right, it's almost like an intersectional thing. There is cycles, and like you said, it's an intergenerational thing.
That's right.
Often. How do companies, corporations help within what they're doing to try and lift people out of poverty simultaneously while you have nonprofits doing that work as well? And I think that goes back to some of the root of impact work.
Yeah, it does. I mean, what we ask of anybody who takes an interest in our goals is to contribute their time to get to know the community itself, to also contribute potential like internships and like availability. And I know it's a lot of what you're doing, Michael, and with this wonderful program, just to get them to kind of like start to see the ways that they can like incorporate the community around them into their for-profit work. And so that interchange has been the Mets, again, we've had, some of our kids like go, serve as just like attendance or any type of work that the Mets organization, Bloomberg, same way, internships, reading programs. So there's a lot of multi-layered kind of, divisions within some of these large conglomerates that can kind of serve to kind of help enrich really the lives of the children that we serve. I mean, we do then partner with, and I feel like we're like a platform, and we just kind of bring in partnerships where they can serve best for our community, like the Fresh Air Fund, for example, right? Well, they have a partnership with the River Fund, so they'll come and see all the hundreds and hundreds of children that are part of the River Fund community and decide, how many they can, incorporate into their summer program. So, yeah, it's like, I feel like at the end of the day, everyone wants to do something, I think, and again, we deal with this even when our business is here. It's like, well, it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to break it down and do almost like a crawl, walk, run approach to kind of getting involved in something. So,
Sure.
My favorite quote by Ben Franklin, well done is better than well said. So start small, or even start big if you'd like, but I'm a huge fan of just tangibility. I feel that's when people do their best work. They can feel it, touch it, see it. And if I put any pressure on our organization from a front office process perspective, it's like, hey, we're going to have a donation, not to get down too many tangents, and we're going to like do a gift for an auction. Let's have people understand where that money went exactly, and then give updates, right? It's kind of like the way that Children's International does it, or I think Make-A-Wish Foundation's done a great job of that, where it's like, I feel it, right? It's like, otherwise blank checks, it's like,
Right, you need to feel connected.
Yeah, I think that's where everyone kind of has that special joy. So if you can tap that for all the right reasons, I think it's special.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, tell me a little bit about Prospect Farms.
Yeah.
Right, because obviously one of the ideas of impact entrepreneurship is people, planet, profit.
Yeah.
And I believe Prospect Farms is kind of in the sustainability realm.
Yeah. Yeah. So, turning back to like what we do every day at Maximalist, and Maximalist is really a family office, for lack of a better word, that my partner Adam and I, as we introduce each other on calls, we're partners in all things, very special relationship, because we really met 4 years ago. So we just had this innate trust that continued to invest in each other around that.
I may ask how you came together, because I always impart on the fellows networking.
Yeah, it gets back to that ask questions. I mean, if you're curious, I think that the relationships that I like to surround myself with are people who are thoughtful, curious, and looking to laugh. Looking to laugh because I think life is short, as we both know, Michael, and like it's one of these things where if you start taking yourself too seriously, I think you start losing focus. So in that thoughtful, curious, and looking to laugh, if you isolate the kind of the curious piece, And again, am I naturally curious? I guess so, and I feel fortunate to be naturally curious. But I think it's it can be tapped, with the right approach and the right surroundings. So, in that curiosity realm, I just walked out of my last job in finance and saw someone on Instagram talking about blockchain. Happened to be a 20-year-old friend who I didn't even know was still alive, candidly, and he'd moved years and years and years ago. And I was like, holy shit, pardon my language. What is this guy doing on Instagram talking about blockchain? So we end up swiping, and then I called him. This is kind of, again, something that I felt now fortunate to just immediately pick up the phone and say, hey man, how have you been? What are you doing? Get over here, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. And within a day of leaving a 25-year career, I was sitting in front of him. Adam at the time was his best friend and partner, still is, personally best friend, but business partner. And over a course of several months, I just was like, I'm unclear what's going on here, but it seems like there's some very smart people. Still unclear like how it's all developing. And so that's what kind of started the nature of our relationship. And that was definitely part of like always make the call, always ask the question, always be curious if you can about like what's around the corner. It also creates, I think, a level of hope, if you consistently kind of can have that flywheel in your brain. So I ended up, linking up with Adam, and he had a small, which is now Madhive.
Okay.
At the time, very small. I think there was less than a dozen people, an enterprise software business he was trying to develop. It's in its infancy, so it takes steps. And that progressed into what Madhive is today, which is 175 people. And we've been able to capture, I think, an element of the TV market as it goes digital, as it goes from broadcast to streaming, the Netflix of the world.
And so kind of disrupting the ad tech.
Very
right?
disruptive in the sense that in our minds, because we built something that can be very locally precise. I think it's very hard to, if you wanted to run like in half a zip code, Michael, in Tampa, a particular audience, in a very, what they call geo-targeted, right, geographically targeted. It's just very hard to run a campaign with very small audiences in a very small part of the country. But we've been able to kind of develop enough technology in concert with Google Cloud and others to be able to kind of find all those people that may be a potential candidate for your product. So it gets more technically advanced in how that happens, but right now, for example, we're running tens of thousands of campaigns simultaneously, all with different targets, all with different geos, all with different KPIs, if you will, key performance indicators and different attributions. So it's been great. Adam and I just then sat there, and as we built Madhive, we're like, well, we're interested in other aspects of the world outside of ad tech. I mean, the last thing I thought I'd be is an operator of an ad tech business. And Prospect Farms came from another friend. Called me, hey, would you like, you raised money in the past, you have to raise some money. I'm kind of, well, maybe. And this was when I was still unclear how I would shape Madhive with Adam. And that became something where, the path it was, path, I guess, least traveled is sometimes the most enjoyable in some kind of perverse ways, because I was like, oh my goodness, this farm's amazing, a 400-year-old dairy farm. Holy crow, I love the idea of CBD and the natural, matter of fact, my arm right now is sitting after tennis elbow in this lather of CBD rubbed, which is helping dramatically.
Very nice.
Shameless plug. And I ended up going up and seeing the farm.
Okay.
And
this is up in Maine?
Yeah, and we in Maine.
Okay.
And taking a step back, what Adam and I always believed, even in ad tech, is we want to set standards. And we believe in efficacy, we believe in education, we believe in transparency. And so every time we're looking at something, we're like, well, it's one thing to like be a good player on a team. It's another thing to like change the field that you're playing on as a good member on a team, meaning standards are the answer, right? Whether it be standards in how we're going to run best practices in our philanthropies, whether it be standards in clean beauty, whether it be standards in ad tech. Like, where are the standards for best practices, if you will? And so we were able to meet a gentleman by the name of Christopher Gavigan, who started a group that you probably know, you or any woman in your life, Honest Company.
Okay.
And he wrote the standards for what organic should be and how you kind of profile something to be organic. And then he ended up writing standards for now the pet community, which is what we're putting together. So we've merged companies, because Prospect Farms, again, is really right now with the help of Brooke Shields, who's a wonderful partner and certainly an American darling and icon, kind of try to figure out how to help pets. So pets and human product lines, merger of two companies, Prima and Prospect Farms becomes a company called Prosper Wellness. And it's a platform. So Madhive's a platform, Prosper, the combined company, is a platform. And then we're doing some interesting things in the new metaverse Web3, which is, again, a platform. So when we step back, Adam and I are like, well, we like standards, we like platforms, and I personally love, and I know he does as well, like just building communities around that.
So it sounds like low morale in all these companies.
Yeah.
So, tell me about that. How does that, in your experiences throughout your career, depending upon the standards that you set as a leader, and others have set as leaders that you work for, how does that affect morale? And that is a form of taking care of people.
It is. It's like culture is everything. We believe in that, and across not only personally Adam and I, but across all the portfolio companies. I feel like we're fortunate to have attracted guys, because I think resourcing is somewhat self-selecting, where if you put out the idea that, and the old Steve Jobs quote of, we don't hire leaders to tell them what to do, we hire leaders to have them tell us what to do, i.e. leaders hire other leaders. So we believe in the idea of giving people a lot of rope, because I think people always want to be heard and want to be able to kind of prove that they can do as much as they can. And then it's our job, and we feel it's our responsibility, to the extent that, again, we're now servicing investors and others. Because my love language, if as you heard of that, is definitely service. What do you call it? Service to others. It's I think that's it. We believe in like just having that kind of environment where people can just really kind of, maybe even sometimes trip and fall and scrape themselves. But as long as they default to how can I help, as long as they default to I want to bring a loosely held but strong conviction, because we think everything starts with someone saying, I think this is a good idea, and taking the courage to say that. Yet, if I were to say that and you were to give me more information to kind of make a better informed decision, I take that well, right? And there's zero like personal defensiveness in anything. So I think taking care of people like that, some of the things we talked about earlier, empathizing, asking more questions, trying to have some candor to some closure, being very tactical. I think a lot of times people will make macro comments that kind of get people somewhat flustered in kind of how to react to it. And I think those are the elements of like what Madhive and our company stand for. I think we say, have a maverick mindset, be of service to others, and it's playing into what we're talking about today, an impact. It's okay, it's wonderful to do well in your job, but we think there's more, and you have to like think about your community around you. So those are the three things. I think, and again, I think these are natural human, if you believe that human beings are naturally good animals, good-natured, however you want to frame it, and you feel like this is the way that people are going to find the most joy, is to have that kind of community around them, it's wonderful. We just keep trying to perpetuate as much as we can, and it's been completely game-changing for me. I thought at 47 that I had learned a lot, and maybe I just kind of figure out how to kind of live the rest of my life in some level of engagement activity. But my switch to entrepreneurialism has opened up pathways that I could have never foreseen. They keep saying, it gets better when you get older, and you're like, yeah, your body starts to age. But I think, again, I believe in all that. I believe in the wisdom, the ability to nurture other people, the ability to kind of listen to other people. I believe, and we believe in junior mentors and senior mentors. I think it's about kind of making connections at any age and any type and any walk of life. So all of that is really kind of like the flywheel that I think we've tried to set up here, where we put it into our benefits package, we put it into the ways that we kind of host events with each other. And it's just completely uplifting in all levels.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And as we start to wind this down, one of the questions that I'm seeking to answer as I travel around the United States and just talk to individuals and organizations, I have always heard that sustainability, ethics, and capitalism can't coexist.
Yeah.
Can they?
Sustainability, ethics, and capitalism. I believe absolutely. Listen, it probably opens up a whole bunch of other questions about how people can like assume more what would be typically termed as power. Yet if it starts with this kernel of being of service to others, that it's limitless, right? And I take so much joy and inspiration from those people and they're out there that, like almost like donate anonymously, always are seen as, people that perpetuate the goodness of others around them. And I think it's difficult needle to thread sometimes when there's just a lot of competing voices. But I think those people that, make that really deliberate choice in how they want to kind of operate can kind of bring money, and I'd like to think the River Fund is an example of this, and ethics, right, and capitalism in to say, hey, at the end of the day, and this is where I have so much appreciation for anybody, whether it be Jeff Bezos or even Elon Musk or others, like, you can have a whole bunch of debates about how people tactically, but just if you really stand back and say, what they are all aspiring to do, I think you can kind of like choose how you want to think about it, right? And I'd like to think at the end of the day, the Giving Pledge and all those things that are happening in Silicon Valley are wonderful, right? And, I love Warren Buffett's quote that, I'm going to accumulate as much wealth during my lifetime, but as I pass, there's going to be a whole generation that's going to get tens of billions of dollars, and that's wonderful.
Hey, Warren.
Hey, Warren, I know.
Right?
I know. And I think that is also I believe, and I was working with someone, I know you and I share the same sentiment, that to be part of something like Ripple on the Road or any organization early on, and that's where it was really humbling and joyous for me to bring my little nephews and my nieces and my cousins, godchildren to the River Fund at a young age. The fact that it's ingrained in them, I think, is just absolutely masterful. So, what brought me to tears once is my cousin was running to an event for the River Fund, and my 6-year-old cousin ran down with her piggy bank and said, "Just give this to Uncle Spence." It's just like,
wow.
Yeah, you get chills, right? Because she was 6 years old. It's what she knew, right? She was standing across the line. One of the things we think about at the River Fund, I know you share the same, approach, is we want to champion the worth of other individuals, right? Regardless of what their state is. You want to interact and champion their worth. So we do little things like give people choices at the pantry, right? As opposed to like, here's your soup or here's your can or open your bag and we give you what we want to give you.
Right.
You choose,
And it's
just
that
little
simple.
things. It's just empowering people to want to have to make decisions that they think are going to be the best interest of their family. So,
all right. Well, and I lift you up. Chances are you're going to lift someone else up.
Agreed. Yeah, yeah.
And that is the ripple effect.
That is the ripple effect, and it's a wonderful name for an organization for that reason.
So final thoughts for anyone who's going to be creating or that's in this work. Or might be, already entrenched in an organization that has old systems, but needs to, move forward to help people and planet. Any piece of advice or your thoughts?
I keep saying to myself every morning, just stay relentless, and there are some days that are just really overbearing, and you find that you're human, and you start to get the second and third thoughts in your brain about how you're impacting people, and what's the maybe immediate payoff, because I think we all need a little morsel of some immediate payoff to keep us going. So I have tricks of the trade that work for me, including like if I'm having a really hard day, I think of the macros. I think of like how lucky and fortunate I am. I default to that mindset. And if the macros are starting to kind of like get to me and make me nervous or anxious, I talk about what can I do today, right? So even my partner, Adam, who, again, we share so much all day with all these kind of things that we have going on. And every few days we'll say, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, I made it, right? Because you just start thinking about, there's someone in Sudan who's 8 years old and just, got decapitated. I mean, not to be brutal, but like there's just things going on in the world. And so if it's constant context and perspective, and by the way, that is my 2022 year word of the year, which is context, helps so much getting into a conversation and framing, as you've done wonderfully in this discussion. So I just say stay relentless, oscillate between micro and macro. If the big stuff's bugging you out, go to the small stuff. If the small stuff's bugging you out, go to the big stuff. And as David Foster Wallace said, again, back to this, your mind can be a terrible master, but is a wonderful servant if you train it. And so whether people are doing meditation and all these other kind of elements of kind of self-care, I think you're doing it hopefully to kind of serve other people, right? So you're acts of service.
Love it.
That's the love language. So may we all be acts of service.
Love it.
Yeah.
Spencer, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I mean, this is going to be a tough act to follow, but
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
That was my
And the
pleasure.
work that you're doing, keep it up.
I promise.
All right.
All right. Thanks so much.
Love it.